When I moved into the house on Briarwood Lane, I thought it was the perfect place to start over. It was quiet, too quiet, actually. The neighborhood sat on the edge of a forest just outside a small town in Oregon. There were only about 15 houses on the entire road, each separated by large yards and tall trees. At night, the streetlights barely reached the ground because the branches blocked most of the light. But I liked it. After living in a noisy apartment in Portland for years, the silence felt peaceful. At least, at first. I moved in during early October. The air was already getting cold, and the days were getting shorter. Most evenings I spent unpacking boxes, setting up furniture, and slowly turning the empty house into something that felt like home. The house itself was small. One living room, a kitchen, 2 bedrooms upstairs. My bedroom window faced the backyard, which opened directly to the forest. The previous owner had warned me about animals. Sometimes deer come through the yard, he told me during the final walkthrough. And raccoons can get into trash cans. That didn't bother me. I grew up around wildlife. What I didn't expect was the man. The first night I saw him, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. It was around 1:30 in the morning. I had just finished setting up my computer desk and was getting ready to sleep. The house was completely dark except for the small lamp beside my bed. Outside, the wind moved softly through the trees. I remember checking my phone before turning off the light. 1:32 a.m. Then I heard something, a sound from outside my window. At first, I thought it was just a branch scratching the glass. The trees in the backyard were close enough that strong wind could push them against the house. But the sound didn't stop. Tap, 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 slow, deliberate. I sat up in bed. The window had thin white curtains covering it. Behind them, I could see the faint orange glow from the streetlight at the end of the road. Then I saw something move. A shadow. Someone was standing outside my window. For a moment, I didn't move. My brain tried to explain it away. Maybe it was a neighbor. Maybe someone was looking for an address. Maybe. The shadow moved closer, and I realized something that made my stomach drop. My bedroom window was on the 2nd floor. No one should have been able to stand there. I slowly reached over and turned off the lamp. The room fell into darkness. The tapping stopped immediately. My heart was pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the curtain shifted slightly. Just enough for me to see something through the thin fabric. A shape, a head. Someone was leaning forward, trying to look into my room. I froze. I could barely breathe. There was no ladder outside. No balcony. Nothing that could explain how someone was standing outside a 2nd floor window. And then the shape slowly moved sideways, disappearing from the glass. The backyard went completely still. I stayed awake for the rest of the night. Around sunrise, I finally gathered the courage to check outside. I walked around the yard, expecting to find footprints or maybe a ladder. But there was nothing. No marks. No footprints. No sign anyone had ever been there. For a while, I convinced myself it had just been my imagination. Maybe I was tired. Maybe the curtain moved in the wind. Maybe the shadow came from a passing car. That explanation worked. Until the next night, because at 1:32 a.m., I heard the tapping again. And this time, I knew I wasn't imagining it. The next day, I tried to convince myself that what I saw the night before wasn't real. It had to be my imagination. Moving into a new house alone can mess with your mind. Every creak sounds like footsteps. Every shadow looks like something watching you. That's what I told myself while making coffee that morning. Sunlight filled the kitchen windows, and everything felt normal again. Birds were chirping outside. A car passed slowly down Briarwood Lane. In daylight, the house didn't feel scary at all. Still, I couldn't shake the memory of that shadow outside my window. After breakfast, I walked around the backyard again. The grass was damp from morning dew. The forest behind the house looked calm and quiet, just tall pine trees stretching into the distance. I looked carefully beneath my bedroom window. Nothing. No ladder. No footprints. No disturbed grass. And that's when I realized something strange. The wall beneath the window was completely flat. There was nothing to stand on. No ledge, no tree branches nearby, no structure that someone could climb. Even if someone brought a ladder, they would have left marks in the grass. But the ground looked untouched. That should have made me feel better. Instead, it made me feel worse. Because if someone had been there, how did they get up to the second floor? I tried not to think about it for the rest of the day. I spent the afternoon unpacking more boxes and setting up the living room. Around sunset, I even drove into town to grab groceries. The town itself was small. One gas station, a diner, and a grocery store that looked like it hadn't changed since the 90s. The cashier was an older woman with gray hair tied into a tight bun. As she scanned my groceries, she asked the usual question. "New around here?" "Yeah," I said. "Just moved onto Briarwood Lane." She paused for a moment. "Which house?" "The blue one at the end." Her expression changed slightly, not shocked, but thoughtful. "Oh," she said quietly. I waited for her to say more, but she didn't. Instead, she just handed me the receipt. "Have a good night." The drive home felt different after that. The road leading to Briarwood Lane had no streetlights. Only the headlights of my car lit the narrow path between the trees. By the time I got home, it was already dark. The house looked lonely sitting at the end of the road. Inside, everything was quiet again. I ate dinner while watching random videos on my laptop, trying not to think about the previous night. Around midnight, I went upstairs. Before going to bed, I did something I hadn't done the night before. I locked every window. Then I closed the curtains tightly over my bedroom window. I told myself that if I couldn't see outside, my mind wouldn't start imagining things. For a while, it worked. I lay in bed scrolling through my phone until I felt tired. Eventually, I turned off the lamp. Darkness filled the room. I checked the time on my phone one last time. 1:18 a.m. Then I set it on the nightstand and closed my eyes. I must have fallen asleep quickly. Because the next thing I remember was the sound. Tap, tap, tap. My eyes opened instantly. For a moment, I didn't move. I just listened. The tapping came again. Tap, tap, tap. Slow, deliberate, coming from the window. My heart started pounding. I slowly turned my head toward the nightstand and grabbed my phone. The screen lit up the dark room. 1:32 a.m. Exactly the same time as the night before. The tapping continued, but this time, it sounded closer. Not like something touching the glass from outside. It sounded like someone was dragging their finger across the window. Scrape, scrape, scrape. My mouth felt dry. I stared at the curtains covering the window. Behind the thin fabric, I could see a faint shape. A shadow. Someone was standing there again. But this time, the shadow didn't stay still. It moved slowly across the curtain, like someone walking sideways along the outside wall. Then it stopped directly in front of the center of the window. The tapping stopped. Everything went silent. I held my breath. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, very slowly, a handprint appeared on the curtain. Not on the glass, on the curtain itself. The fabric pushed inward as if someone was pressing their palm against it from the other side. But that was impossible. The curtain was inside the room. No one should have been able to touch it. I felt every muscle in my body freeze. The hand pressed harder. 5 clear finger shapes pushing against the cloth. And then, the hand slowly began sliding downward, leaving a faint outline across the curtain. That's when I realized something that made my blood run cold. The hand wasn't outside. It was pressing from inside the room, right behind the curtain. And I was suddenly certain. I wasn't alone in the bedroom anymore. For several seconds, I couldn't move. My eyes were locked on the curtain. The shape of the hand had already disappeared, but the fabric was still slightly swaying, as if something had just brushed against it. My mind was racing. That didn't make any sense. The curtain was inside the room. There was no way someone outside could push it like that. Unless someone was standing behind it. Inside my bedroom, the thought made my chest tighten. I slowly slid my hand across the bed and grabbed my phone again. The bright screen lit up a small part of the room, but the light didn't reach the window. The curtain was still closed. Still. Too still. I didn't hear breathing. I didn't hear footsteps. But I felt something worse. The feeling that someone was standing there, perfectly silent, watching me. My heart was pounding so hard it almost hurt. I thought about jumping out of bed and running for the door. But to reach the door, I would have to pass right next to the window. Right next to the curtain. If someone was standing there, they would be less than 3 feet away from me. I stayed frozen. Seconds passed. Then a minute. Nothing moved. Eventually I forced myself to speak. Hello? My voice sounded weak and strange in the quiet room. No answer. I swallowed and tried again. Is someone there? Still nothing. The silence was worse than any response. My brain started forming explanations. Maybe the curtain moved because of air from the vent. Maybe the house shifted. Maybe. A soft sound came from behind the curtain. A small movement, like fabric brushing against something. I held my breath. Slowly, very slowly, the bottom edge of the curtain lifted. Just a little, only an inch or two. Enough to reveal the dark space beneath it. I stared at the floor under the window, waiting to see something. Shoes, feet, anything. But there was nothing there. Just the hardwood floor. Empty. The curtain dropped again. I sat there in shock. That didn't make sense. If someone had been standing there, I would have seen their feet. Unless they were standing on something. Or, my stomach tightened at another possibility. Unless they had already moved somewhere else in the room. I suddenly felt exposed sitting on the bed. The closet door was slightly open across the room. The hallway outside my bedroom was dark. There were too many places someone could hide. I needed to check the house. But the idea of getting out of bed made my entire body tense. What if someone was waiting for me to move? Another sound broke the silence. This time it came from downstairs. A soft creak, like someone stepping on the wooden floor in the living room. My head snapped toward the bedroom door. Then came another sound. A slow, careful step. Creak. My heart dropped. Someone was definitely inside the house. And they were trying to move quietly. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept beside my bed. I had bought it years ago after a break-in at my old apartment, but I had never actually needed to use it. Until now. I slid out of bed slowly. The floor felt cold under my feet. I kept my eyes on the curtain the entire time. Nothing moved behind it. Step by step, I walked toward the bedroom door. Another creak came from downstairs. Whoever was there was still moving. I reached the door and slowly pushed it open. The hallway was completely dark. The only light came from a faint glow downstairs in the living room. My stomach twisted. I was certain I had turned off every light before going to bed. But now, a dim yellow light was coming from the living room lamp. Someone had turned it on. I tightened my grip on the baseball bat. Every instinct in my body told me to leave the house and call the police. But another thought stopped me. If someone had broken in, I needed to know if they were still here. I stepped into the hallway. The floor creaked slightly under my weight. The house suddenly felt much bigger than it had before. Much darker. I walked slowly toward the stairs. The light from downstairs grew brighter as I approached. Then I heard something that made my entire body freeze. A voice. Soft. Whispering. At first I couldn't understand what it was saying. But as I got closer to the top of the stairs, the words became clear. It was repeating the same sentence over and over. Quietly. Almost gently. I'm still outside. My blood ran cold. Because the voice was coming from the living room. Inside my house. And whoever was down there was whispering the exact same words I had heard in my head the night before. I'm still outside. I'm still outside. I'm still outside. I slowly leaned forward and looked down the staircase. The living room lamp was on. The couch faced away from me. And someone was sitting there. Perfectly still. Looking directly at the window. I stood at the top of the stairs, barely breathing. The living room lamp cast a dim yellow light across the floor, creating long shadows that stretched toward the staircase. And there was someone sitting on the couch, perfectly still. From where I stood, I could only see the back of their head and shoulders. They were facing the large living room window that looked out toward the front yard and the empty road. The whispering had stopped. The entire house was silent again. My hands tightened around the baseball bat. I told myself there were only two possibilities. Either someone had broken into my house, or I was losing my mind. Neither option felt comforting. Slowly, carefully, I stepped down one stair. The wood creaked softly beneath my weight. The figure on the couch didn't move. Another step. Still nothing. I kept my eyes locked on the person sitting there. They looked tall. Their shoulders were narrow, and their head tilted slightly forward, like they were concentrating on something outside the window. Then I noticed something strange. They weren't breathing. At least, I couldn't see any movement at all. No shifting. No turning of the head. No reaction to the creaking stairs. I took another step down. Then another. By the time I reached the middle of the staircase, I was close enough to see more detail. The person was wearing dark clothes. A long jacket. Their hair looked thin and messy, hanging slightly over the back of their neck. Still, they didn't move. Not even a little. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure they could hear it. But the figure remained frozen. Watching the window, I forced myself to speak. "Hey." My voice echoed slightly in the quiet house. No response. The person didn't react at all. I swallowed and stepped down another stair. "Who are you?" Nothing. The silence was unbearable. I finally reached the bottom of the stairs. Now I was only about 10 feet behind the couch. The living room smelled strange. Like damp wood, and something older. Something stale. The lamp on the side table flickered slightly. For a moment, the light dimmed. And in that brief flicker, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. The figure on the couch wasn't sitting normally. Their back was too straight. Too rigid. And their arms were hanging down at their sides in a stiff, unnatural way. Like a mannequin. I took one slow step closer. The wooden floor creaked loudly. Still no reaction. Now I was only a few feet away. My entire body was tense as I lifted the baseball bat slightly, ready for anything. "Listen," I said quietly. "You need to leave my house." Nothing. The person didn't even turn their head. I leaned forward slightly, trying to see their face. But the couch blocked my view. Finally, I gathered my courage and stepped around the side of the couch. The moment I saw the figure's face, I stopped cold. There was no face. Where a face should have been. There was only darkness. Not shadow. Not hair covering their face. Just an empty black shape where the features should have been. Like the light simply refused to touch that part of their head. My brain struggled to process what I was seeing. The figure slowly turned its head toward me. And for the first time, it moved. The movement was slow, jerky, unnatural, like something learning how to move a human body for the first time. My hands started shaking. I took a step backward. "What are you?" The figure didn't answer. Instead, it lifted one long arm and pointed toward the living room window. My eyes followed the direction of its finger. Outside, the front yard was dark. But under the dim streetlight near the road, I saw someone standing there. A tall silhouette, perfectly still, looking directly at my house. Watching the window. Watching me. My heart dropped. There were two of them. One inside the house, and one outside. The figure beside the couch slowly lowered its arm. Then, in a voice that sounded dry and hollow, it whispered something. Something that made the blood drain from my face. "You weren't supposed to see him." And then the lamp went out. The room plunged into complete darkness. The moment the lamp went out, the living room disappeared into complete darkness. I couldn't see anything. Not the couch. Not the window. Not the thing that had been standing right beside me. For a second, my brain froze. Then instinct took over. I stumbled backward, gripping the baseball bat so tightly my fingers hurt. My heart was pounding violently in my chest. The room felt suddenly smaller, heavier, like the darkness itself was pressing in. I tried to listen, but the silence was worse than any sound. If the thing had moved, I would have heard footsteps. But I heard nothing. No breathing, no shifting, no movement at all. It was like the entire room had become empty again. Or like whatever had been there didn't make noise when it moved. I slowly reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking so badly that I almost dropped it. The screen lit up, sending a weak white glow across the room. The couch was still there. But the figure was gone. Completely gone. My eyes darted around the living room, the doorway to the kitchen, the hallway leading back toward the stairs, the front door. Everything looked normal, too normal. My phone light moved slowly toward the window. And that's when I remembered the second figure. The one outside. I stepped closer and pointed the phone toward the glass. The streetlight down the road still glowed faintly. But the silhouette I had seen earlier was gone. The road was empty. The yard was empty. No one stood under the streetlight anymore. I let out a shaky breath. Maybe they had run away. Maybe whoever had broken into my house had just escaped when the light went out. That explanation almost made sense. Almost. But then I remembered something. The thing inside the house hadn't looked human. Not completely. And it had said something strange. You weren't supposed to see him. Him. Not me. Not us. Just him. My thoughts were interrupted by a sudden sound behind me. A faint creak. Upstairs. My entire body froze again. The sound came from the direction of my bedroom. Slow. Heavy. Like someone walking across the floor. But I was the only person in the house. Or at least, I was supposed to be. Another creak echoed from above. Then another. Whoever was upstairs wasn't trying to hide anymore. They were walking slowly, deliberately, back and forth across the hallway. I turned off the phone light immediately. The living room plunged back into darkness. My mind was racing. If someone was upstairs, that meant the thing I saw downstairs had moved. And it had moved quietly enough that I hadn't heard it pass me. Which meant it could still be anywhere in the house. Right behind me, right beside me, or watching from the stairs. I forced myself to breathe slowly. Panic wouldn't help. I needed to get out of the house. The front door was only a few steps away. I could run outside, get into my car, and drive straight to the police station in town. But to reach the door, I had to pass the staircase. And right now, something was walking at the top of those stairs. Another creak echoed above. Then something new happened. A shadow slowly appeared on the wall beside the staircase. Not a full body, just a shape, the outline of someone standing at the top step. Looking down, I held the baseball bat up, my arms shaking. The shadow didn't move for several seconds. Then a voice came from upstairs. Soft, calm, the exact same voice I had heard whispering earlier. You shouldn't be here. My stomach dropped. I swallowed and forced the words out. This is my house. There was a long pause. Then the voice answered, no. The shadow on the wall slowly stretched as the figure leaned forward. You're just the next one. My blood ran cold. Next what? I asked. Another pause. Then the voice spoke again. And what it said made my entire body go numb. The next person who sees us. At that moment, something knocked on the front door. 3 slow knocks. Knock, knock, knock. I slowly turned toward the door. My heart racing. Because I suddenly realized something terrifying. The figure that had been standing under the streetlight earlier was now outside my door. And whoever was upstairs was already inside. The knocking on the front door echoed through the house. Slow, patient. Knock, knock, knock. I stood frozen in the middle of the living room, gripping the baseball bat so tightly that my knuckles had turned white. Upstairs, the figure at the top of the stairs hadn't moved. Its shadow still stretched across the wall, long and distorted in the dim glow from my phone screen. Outside the front door, someone had just knocked. And somehow, I knew it was the same silhouette I had seen standing under the streetlight earlier. My mind raced. There were only 2 possibilities. Either someone outside had come to help, or something else had arrived. The knock came again. Knock, knock, knock. This time it was louder, more impatient. My breathing became shallow. I looked toward the staircase again. The shadow was still there, watching, waiting. Then the voice upstairs spoke again. You should answer it. The words were calm, almost curious. I didn't respond. Instead, I slowly backed away from the stairs and moved toward the front door. Every step felt heavy, dangerous, because turning my back on the staircase meant I couldn't see the thing standing there anymore. But the knocking continued. Knock, knock, knock. I reached the door. The handle felt cold under my hand. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. For a moment, I considered running. I could unlock the door, sprint to my car, and drive away without looking back. But another thought stopped me. What if the person outside wasn't dangerous? What if they were a neighbor? Someone who had seen what was happening? Slowly, I leaned forward and looked through the small peephole in the door. At first, I saw nothing. Just darkness. Then something moved. A face suddenly filled the peephole. I jumped back in shock. A man was standing outside the door. But something about his face felt wrong. His expression was blank, emotionless. He didn't blink. He didn't move. He was just staring directly into the peephole, like he knew I was looking through it. My chest tightened. Then he spoke. His voice was muffled through the door, but I could still hear it clearly. You opened the window. The words made no sense. I didn't, I said quietly. The man tilted his head slightly. You saw him. My stomach twisted. How do you know that? I asked. For several seconds, he didn't answer. Then he leaned closer to the door. His eye filled the entire peephole. You're not supposed to see them. Them. Not him. Them. My mind flashed back to the figure upstairs. The one that had been sitting on the couch. The one without a face. Suddenly, a sound came from behind me. A slow step. Creak. The floorboards near the staircase shifted. I turned around slowly. The shadow on the wall had moved. The figure was no longer standing at the top of the stairs. It was coming down, step by step. I could hear the wood creaking beneath its weight. Creak, creak, creak. Each step was slow and deliberate, like it knew I had nowhere to go. I turned back to the door in panic. Who are you? I whispered to the man outside. The man smiled slightly, but it wasn't a normal smile. It looked forced, unnatural, like someone had told him what a smile should look like, but he didn't fully understand it. I live here, he said. My heart stopped. No, I said quickly. I just bought this house. The man outside slowly shook his head. Not the house. His smile widened slightly. The window. A cold chill ran down my spine. Behind me, another step echoed from the staircase. Closer now, almost at the bottom. I could feel something standing behind me in the darkness. Listening, watching. The man outside leaned closer to the door again, and whispered something that made my blood run cold. There are more of them in the forest. At that exact moment, something behind me spoke, right next to my ear. You let him see us. I spun around in terror. But the living room was empty again. The staircase was empty. The shadows were still. Only the faint sound of wind moving through the trees outside filled the silence. Slowly, I turned back to the peephole. The man outside was gone. But in the distance, under the streetlight at the end of the road, I could see several silhouettes standing in the darkness, watching the house. And now, they were moving closer. I stared through the peephole for what felt like forever. The man who had been standing at my door was gone. But the streetlight at the end of Briarwood Lane still glowed faintly through the darkness. And under that pale light, I could see them, at least 5 silhouettes, maybe more, standing in the road, perfectly still, watching the house. My breathing became shallow. They were too far away for me to see their faces. But their shapes were unmistakably human. Tall, thin, motionless. And then, one of them moved. It took a slow step forward. Then another. Soon the others followed. They began walking down the road toward my house. Not running. Not rushing. Just walking slowly. Like they had all the time in the world. I stepped back from the door immediately. My mind was racing. There was no way 5 people had just appeared out of nowhere in the middle of the night. And even if they had, why were they all coming toward my house? Another terrible thought crossed my mind. What if they weren't people? My eyes slowly moved toward the living room window. The forest behind the house was darker than the road, almost completely black. The trees were tall and tightly packed together, blocking most of the moonlight. For a moment, everything looked normal. Then something moved between the trees. A shadow. Then another. My heart dropped. There were shapes inside the forest too. Dozens of them, standing between the trees, watching the house, watching me. I stepped away from the window quickly. The entire property suddenly felt surrounded. Front, back, every direction. Something had been waiting in that forest. And now they were coming out. My brain desperately tried to understand what was happening. Then I remembered the words the man outside had said. There are more of them in the forest. At the time, I thought he might be crazy. Now I realized something worse. He had been warning me. A sudden sound came from upstairs again. Creak. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Someone was walking across the hallway floor. My chest tightened. I looked up toward the staircase. The darkness at the top of the stairs looked deeper than before. Like something was standing there again. Listening. Waiting. But this time, there was more than one set of footsteps. 2. Maybe 3. My stomach twisted. That meant the thing I had seen earlier wasn't alone. Something was inside the house with me. Something else was outside. And something else was still in the forest. The footsteps upstairs stopped. Then a voice spoke. Soft. Dry. The same hollow voice I had heard before. You shouldn't have opened the curtain. I froze. I didn't, I whispered back. You looked, the voice replied calmly. There was a pause. Then another voice spoke. A different one. This voice sounded deeper. Older. You saw the window. The window. Not your window. Just, the window. My mind struggled to understand what they meant. Then something clicked. The previous owner of the house had warned me about animals in the backyard. But he had never mentioned people. Or neighbors coming around at night. Or anything strange about the house. But the cashier at the grocery store. She had reacted when I told her where I lived. She knew something. And suddenly I remembered something else. During the final walkthrough of the house, the previous owner had avoided looking at the bedroom window. At the time, I thought he was just distracted. Now I realized he might have been afraid. A loud knock suddenly slammed against the front door. This time it was much harder. Bang, bang, bang. I jumped. They had reached the house. More shadows moved across the frosted glass of the door. Several figures now stood on the porch. I backed away slowly. Then another sound came from the living room window. A soft tap. I turned my head slowly. A face was pressed against the glass. Not fully visible, just a pale shape in the darkness. Watching me. More tapping started. From the back of the house. From the windows. From the walls. Tap, tap, tap. The sound spread across the house like rain hitting a roof. Something was surrounding me, trying to get in, or maybe, trying to get me to look outside again. Because the moment I looked at that face in the window, it slowly smiled, and I suddenly realized something terrifying. It had the exact same face as the man who had been standing at my door. The face outside the window didn't move. It just stayed there, pressed against the glass, watching me. The pale skin looked stretched and unnatural under the faint porch light that reached the side of the house. But the worst part was the eyes. They were wide open, unblinking, and they looked exactly like the eyes of the man who had been standing at my front door. My stomach tightened. How? I whispered to myself. The tapping around the house continued. Windows, walls, even the back door. Tap, 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 like dozens of fingers gently knocking all at once. The face at the window tilted slightly. The smile slowly widened, but it didn't feel friendly. It looked like someone copying what a human smile should look like, without understanding why people smile. Then the mouth moved. Even though the glass was closed, I could still hear the voice clearly. You see us now. I stepped backward. My hands were shaking so badly that the baseball bat slipped slightly in my grip. What are you? I asked. The face didn't answer right away. Instead, it slowly lifted one pale hand and pressed it against the window. The glass fogged slightly under its palm. Then it spoke again. We were here first. My chest tightened. What does that mean? The figure outside leaned closer. Its forehead pressed against the glass now. You opened the window. I didn't open anything. I said. You looked. Those words again. You looked. I suddenly understood something terrible. They didn't need me to open the window physically. They only needed me to notice it. To see them. To look through the glass. Because the moment I had looked out that first night, something had changed. Something had connected our world to theirs. Another voice suddenly spoke from behind me. Inside the house. You shouldn't talk to them. I spun around instantly. One of the figures was standing halfway down the staircase. Its body was tall and thin. Its head slightly tilted to the side. But like the one on the couch earlier, it didn't have a face. Just darkness where its features should have been. Who are you? I asked. The faceless figure didn't move. It simply stood there watching me. You saw the window, it said slowly. Yes, I answered. What is it? There was a long silence. Then the figure spoke again. It's not a window. My stomach twisted. Then what is it? The thing on the stairs slowly lifted one arm and pointed toward the glass behind me. A door. A cold chill spread across my body. I turned slowly toward the living room window again. The face outside was still there. Still smiling. Still watching. Once someone sees it, the faceless figure continued quietly. The door opens. The tapping outside the house grew louder. More frantic. More excited. They've been waiting a long time. My heart started racing again. Waiting for what? The faceless figure answered calmly. For someone to notice them. The smile outside the window suddenly widened. And then something horrifying happened. Another face slowly appeared beside the first one. Then another. And another. More pale shapes pressed against the glass from outside. Watching. Dozens of eyes staring into the living room. You see us now, they whispered together. You see us now. I stepped backward until my back hit the wall. What happens if I stop looking? I asked desperately. The faceless figure on the stairs tilted its head. You can't. Why not? The voice behind me answered. Because now they know you exist. A loud cracking sound suddenly came from the window. Crack. The glass began forming thin spiderweb lines. My heart nearly stopped. The things outside pressed harder against the glass. Smiling. Waiting. Another crack spread across the window. The door between our worlds was breaking. And something told me, once it opened completely, they weren't going to leave. The cracks in the window spread slowly across the glass. Thin white lines crawling outward like spiderwebs. Outside, the faces pressed harder against the surface. More of them appeared every second. Pale skin. Wide eyes. Smiling mouths that didn't look natural. And behind them, I could see even more shapes moving in the darkness of the forest. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. Watching. Waiting. My chest tightened as I backed away from the window. This can't be real, I whispered. The faceless figure on the staircase remained perfectly still. Watching both me and the things outside. They're getting closer, it said quietly. Another crack echoed through the room. Crack. A small piece of glass fell onto the living room floor. The creatures outside reacted instantly. Their smiles widened. They've been waiting for this moment, the faceless figure continued. For a very long time. I turned toward it. What are they? The figure didn't answer immediately. Instead, it slowly walked down the last few steps of the staircase. Its movements were stiff and unnatural. Like before, like something learning how to move inside a human body. When it reached the bottom step, it stopped. They are what lives on the other side. The other side of what? The door. My eyes moved back toward the window. Another crack split across the glass. The tapping outside grew louder. More excited. What happens if the window breaks? I asked. The figure turned its empty face toward me. Then they come through. My heart began racing again. Why now? I asked. Why me? For the first time since I had seen it, the faceless figure hesitated. Then it spoke. You're not the first. The words hit me like ice water. What do you mean? The figure slowly raised one long arm and pointed toward the wall near the staircase. I followed its gesture. There, almost hidden by shadows, was something I hadn't noticed before. Scratches. Dozens of them carved into the wooden wall. Numbers. Tall, uneven lines scratched deep into the wood. At first I didn't understand what they were. Then my stomach dropped. They were tally marks. Like someone counting something over and over again. I stepped closer and shined my phone light onto the wall. There were hundreds of marks. Grouped in fives. 5, 10, 15? All the way up the wall. How many are there? I asked quietly. The faceless figure answered in the same calm tone. 214. My mouth went dry. What does that mean? Another loud crack exploded across the window. Crack. A larger piece of glass fell inward. The creatures outside pressed their fingers through the opening. Long pale fingers stretching through the gap. They were the ones who lived here before you, the figure said. My blood ran cold. The previous owners? I asked. Yes. And they all saw the window? The figure nodded slowly. Every person who lives here eventually looks outside. My mind raced. And then what happens? The faceless figure looked back toward the window. The creatures were pushing harder now. Their fingers stretching farther through the broken glass. They become like me. My heart nearly stopped. You mean? Yes, the figure whispered. They stay. Another voice suddenly spoke from the broken window. Soft. Excited. You're almost ready. I turned toward the glass. One of the pale faces had pushed closer than the others. Its eyes locked onto mine. You opened the door, it said. You will replace him. My stomach twisted. Replace who? Slowly, the pale creature lifted one finger and pointed toward the faceless figure standing beside the staircase. And for the first time, I realized something horrifying. The height, the shape of the body, even the way it stood. The faceless figure beside me looked exactly like me. And then it spoke one final sentence. You're the next one who saw the window. Another piece of glass shattered. The door between the worlds was almost completely open. The last crack in the window spread across the glass like lightning. Then the entire pane shattered. Glass exploded inward, scattering across the living room floor. For a moment, everything went silent. No tapping, no whispering, just the sound of cold night air rushing into the house. The creatures outside didn't rush in like I expected. They didn't climb through the broken window. Instead, they waited, standing just outside the frame. Watching, smiling, like they were waiting for something specific to happen. My breathing was uneven. My hands trembled around the baseball bat. I slowly turned toward the faceless figure beside the staircase. You said I would replace you. The figure didn't move. Yes. Replace you with what? The figure tilted its head slightly. With this. And suddenly, something strange happened. The air in the room felt heavy. Thick. Like the atmosphere itself had changed. My ears began to ring. At first I thought I was going to faint. But then I realized something worse. The ringing wasn't in my ears. It was inside my head. A sound. Low. Constant. Like hundreds of voices whispering at once. My vision blurred for a second. When it cleared, something was different. The room looked the same. But the creatures outside the window looked clearer. Sharper. Like I was seeing them without the glass between us. And then I understood something horrifying. The window had never been the real door. I was. The moment I had noticed them. The moment I had looked outside that first night. Something had connected me to them. The window had only been a way to show me. A way to let me see what already existed around me. The faceless figure stepped closer. You understand now. My throat felt dry. You were the person before me. Yes. And the scratches on the wall. 214 people, the figure said calmly. All of them saw the window. And they all became this? Yes. My chest tightened. What happens to them? The figure slowly turned its empty face toward the forest outside. They wait. I followed its gaze. For the first time, I saw the shapes in the forest clearly. Not just silhouettes anymore. Faces. Bodies. Hundreds of figures standing between the trees. Watching the house. Watching the window. Watching me. My stomach dropped. They were all people? Yes. A cold wind blew through the broken window. The creatures outside stepped closer now. Their smiles wider than before. "You're ready," one of them whispered. The faceless figure beside me turned toward the door. Then it did something unexpected. It walked toward the front door, opened it, and stepped outside. For a moment, the creatures around the house parted, letting it pass. Then they surrounded it, their shapes slowly disappearing into the darkness of the road, leaving only me inside the house. Alone. Or at least, that's what I thought. Because when I turned back toward the staircase, I saw something that made my entire body go cold. Someone was standing at the top of the stairs. A man, looking confused, holding a small suitcase, like he had just arrived. He looked around the house nervously. Then he noticed me standing in the living room. "What the hell?" he said. "Who are you?" I tried to answer, but the words wouldn't come out. Because something was wrong with my voice. It sounded hollow, dry, unfamiliar. The man stepped closer. "Hey, do you live here?" Then he noticed the broken window. And slowly, he looked outside. Toward the forest, toward the road, toward the darkness. I tried to warn him. Tried to tell him not to look. But I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I could only stand there, watching. Just like the faceless figure had done before me. The man stared at the forest for several seconds. Then he turned back toward me. His face had gone pale. "What are those things?" he whispered. Behind him, I could already see shapes moving between the trees. More of them coming closer. More smiles appearing in the darkness. The man looked terrified. Why are they looking at me? I finally understood the last part of the curse. Once someone sees the window, they don't leave the house. They stay. And they wait. For the next person to arrive. For the next person to look outside. For the next person to see them. And now, that person was standing right in front of me. And he had just looked through the window.